Hello, audience. We are here with Liam Sinclair. I actually can pronounce that. I'm terrible with names. Oh, I need to change. I talked when did the episode with Dylan. I was like, I need to change the name to don't ask me what it's called, ask me how it works. And so, freaking, the full title of this my channel is Learning Science and How to Deal with People for My Reptiles. So they got shortened to Learning for My Reptiles. And so I've always loved your name, Reptiles and Research. And it's been very fascinating to see some of your episodes and stuff. And I'm very, very enjoying it. I think most of the people that would probably watch this will know where you're from, know your backstory, know that you've worked in the reptile community for a long time. So I don't know if that's somewhere where we really want to start. But, I've been bringing you up a while here. And honestly, because I keep mentioning it over and over and over again to people, it's like, okay, so like I watched your episode of the one that created a bunch of the controversy.
Which one?
Yeah, that one that was the biggest one about racks in the brain.
Oh, right, yeah, the presentation to the show.
I was watching it at work, and like I actually have an associate's in physics, a bachelor's in polymer chemistry focused on medical technology. I studied how to target cancer cells, Zika, Ebola. I studied how to do batteries, tires, freaking any type of plastic manufacturing. I studied actually some upper level physics. I did some studies in chaos theory. I've actually done studies in human communication, nonverbal communication. So that's been very fascinating. So when I saw your episode there, because I love it, it's the only thing I'd go back to school for is neuroscience. And so I was like, dude, this is really cool. Great. Like, I'm just like, this makes perfect sense. And then like a day later or like 2 days later, I was like, so this is controversial for a week? Where have I been? Like, what the hell are they talking about this being controversial? This is science. Why is this controversial that if you don't use it, you lose it in the brain? Like, people don't understand that the human brain has been shrinking for that exact reason. The same exact reason. And so even though we haven't really been less intelligent, we've just been losing that. And so, like, I come on these things, and I've been doing some neuroscience myself in reptiles, and I make it very clear, it's like I'm not really okay with somebody coming on here and telling you that I'm completely wrong. You can ask questions all day long. I love that. That's fine. Tell me that you don't think I'm right for this reason or that reason, and we'll talk about it. But if you come at me and tell me I'm just wrong, like what they did with you, like I'm like, no, Liam was right, guys. And if you can prove Liam wrong, go get your fucking Nobel Prize. If you're going to tell me that you don't need $1 million, millions of dollars, because if you can prove that neurons in animals work differently than neurons in humans, you will win a Nobel Prize. That's just, there is no ifs, ands, or buts. You will get the Nobel Prize for that. And if you're like, well, I don't need a Nobel Prize. No, it's millions of dollars. You're telling me you can't use millions of dollars. No, go. And then don't come back at me telling me that I need to go get a Nobel Prize for talking about basic science. That's not how Nobel science works. Like, it's not, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's how did that study, like you give that interview or that talk, how did all that come about?
So all of that came about, basically I have to give most of the credit to Lloyd Torini, who's my colleague over at her channel is Lloyd Torini, but behavior education as well. She has been like heavily invested in obviously she's very up there with investigating like snake behavior. So she's done a lot of research into the neuroscience of snake behavior. So she actually wrote a paper that she put out that went into like some animal behavior and training journal, and that went really well. And she talks about potential neuro consequences of snakes in like impoverished environments, but also when they get enrichment and stuff. So I took basically she laid the foundation for me essentially, and I took that and I built upon that and what I thought that meant in terms of what's happening culturally. So a lot of the examples of like the papers showing like neuroplasticity and like the sea slugs and bumblebees and stuff, that the foundation had already been laid down for me. But what it meant culturally to what herpetoculture is where I took it in my talk. So the rat cycle is just once all this came together for me and I realized what this research meant, I started to be able to point things out, and I kind of could see what I think's happening, and that's why I really took it. So my local reptile society is Portsmouth and Amphibian. It's just called PRAS, the acronym. And they asked me to come to a talk. And I thought it was the perfect time to do this talk, but also film it. And I thought it would add a bit of credibility as well. It'd been a live audience as well. So I went and did that. And the lighting wasn't very good and stuff, so it come across quite dim, which is unfortunate, but it turned out quite well. And people were really receptive for it. It's the first time I've given a talk where it finished and there was just silence after, where people were just like I could almost feel the room just processing. And yeah, it went really well.
Yeah, this was very fascinating to me. I've literally been doing some neuroscience and reptile episodes, and I have found brain scans of like bearded dragons and like diagrams of other reptiles. And there's actually an organization that has made 4D models on YouTube of reptile brains. It's been very fascinating to look into this stuff. And I've had people ask me, well, and like actually very intelligent people, where'd you find those? I Googled them. Like I literally Googled them. And what that tells you right there is the information is so easy to find, but nobody's looking for it. And like I do also psychological studies on my channel. And I have like Bill Stewart on and stuff, and we talk. He's a family therapist in Wisconsin. He took over the presidency of the Madison Herp Society over from Ryan McVeigh and stuff. And we talk about the human brain a little bit on empathy and how like I have like this model. And it's very fascinating to take this kind of understanding, a deeper understanding of empathy and how brain parts work and actually how the reptile brain probably works. But we don't have enough scans. And so I'm actually looking into one of here in St. Louis, we've got one of the best colleges in the country for some of this stuff. And we actually have a really cool neuroscience department. And I'm trying to get some of those guys on. And one of them does studies, and I'm going to go over the paper like you do. I'm trying to take from you, because you've got a great audience. You do something that they really like, is hearing that scientific stuff. It was something I was talking with Dylan about, is like, it doesn't seem like a lot of people want to hear me talk. They like the subjects that I come up with. They just don't seem to want to hear it from me. And I'm kind of okay with that to a point, because then somebody else can come along and do it better than me. That's fine. So somebody's got to start it. Stephen Hawking's got a lot wrong, but he literally educated people enough that they wanted to go out there and study the stuff that he studied. And those people that he encouraged are the people that proved him wrong. So to me, that's one of those things that I think you're awesome. How'd you come up with the idea for your channel and the setup of the channel? And I do want to go over your latest video where you talk about what you're doing in your Patreon, because I actually love it.
I've recently got to the point lately where I just say things bluntly. So I used to hold so much back, but now I'll just say it. So the reason I started my channel was, first of all, I went through the whole steps of becoming, like, studying and like going through the ropes of trying to become a zookeeper. I got my degree and whatnot, and I went and worked at the oh my god, well, Parrot Trust. And then after that, I went into like working like reptile shops and stuff. And I was just a hobbyist keeper, and I would engage in like Facebook groups and then just be a part of like sort of the advancing community, but never had like any sort of voice or a platform in this sort of manner. And it was a video I saw from Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles that pissed me off that much that I wanted to make my own channel just to combat the bullshit. And that's bad. Bluntly putting it, that's what happened. It was like top 5 lizards that don't need UV, and it was like crested gecko, leopard gecko, and I was like, it annoyed me so much that it made me start my own channel just out of pure annoyance, and then I just kind of like, I've grown it from there, essentially. Truth be told, that's literally why I did it.
I actually did a video reacting to his the stupidest reptile laws, animal laws, and people hated me for it. It's the only time that I've really gotten a lot of like actual feedback from anybody, from audience. And it's like, no, I'm a real scientist with actual understanding on all sorts of weird topics that most people don't. No, and I don't hate Adam, but it's like, no, he got a lot wrong. He was mouthing off about the fact that we can't have hognose snakes here easily. Like, you have to have all these different licenses and stuff. No, the hognose snakes are here already. So if people accidentally started releasing those hognose, we could actually diminish so the law is actually reasonable for why it's here. And people just hated me for that shit. And it's like, I'm like, I don't care. I mean, and then I go on to interview a bunch of herpetologists from different states to talk about laws and why those laws exist. And it's diseases and all sorts of stuff that get out and just all these different things. Because I find it very difficult. I've got videos on quarantining and people still try to come at me even a year later. Like, well, that's not how you keep that species. It's quarantine. Mm-hmm. Nobody else is doing this for this exact reason. It literally says it in the title. I say it throughout the whole video, and people still come at me. And it's like, no, it's quarantine. We don't. I freaked out one day at Phil and Roy. I've never been able to finish that episode because I thought they were saying don't quarantine. Because I'm just like, no, you guys have a voice now. You guys have to be this. That's not what they were saying. They were talking about like adapting the animal, like acclimating, not corn. They weren't, but I thought they were talking about quarantine. And boy, it's no. What are some of the ways that you've been able to deal with that? Because you said you've started to just be more verbally about stuff. Just be like, because I'm kind of the same way now. Like, it's gotten to a point where I don't have a lot of people listening. So I just want to tell you, be like, no, this is an absolute to a point. Like, this is what this is. Let's just move on so we can move on to something else.
I think one of the things that I've really wanted to really focus on is being very intentional when you say something's an opinion versus a fact, or versus like in a paper or something. So I almost want to add inflection to be like, in my opinion, to show when something's my actual opinion and when something's actually a fact. Because I think a lot of people conflate the two. So if it's just my opinion, I'm like, I actually do quite like to use shavings for my king snakes because I'm okay with it because it allows them to actually express the behavior they're motivated to express, like tunneling. But then if they want a human-like climate, I've got a humid hide. So I just trade that off for like convenience for like using soils. So in my opinion, I prefer shavings in some cases. That's an opinion. And if people want to argue with it, I'm like, cool. But when something's a fact, I'm like, I'm not afraid to say it because I know it's a fact, and I have a very good understanding of animal welfare. Like, it's the thing that I think about when I wake up and the thing I think about when I go to sleep. I've I've gone very far down the rabbit hole by now. And when some things are very, very basic and there's so much understanding in terms of animal welfare science, there's like, you're just wrong. I don't feel the need to really dance around the subject.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. But weirdly, I'm not normal either. My brain doesn't work the same way everybody else's does. It's weird, but it's quite fascinating to imagine this stuff now, because I'm still struggling with getting an audience like you have. What are some of the recommendations that you have for getting an audience? Because I know that you probably feel like yours isn't that big compared to other people's, but honestly, I've done the research. I've looked into all these different channels, and it's really fascinating how the more educated, more herping style channels have a more limited viewership than somebody like Adam Wickens, but yet they have a more loyal channel, I guess is how you would say that.
I don't really think I'm an expert on how to grow a channel. I just think that I've just slogged it out. This is like I'm like 3.5 years in now. I grew really fast. I grew really fast when I first started because I think it was the timing. Like nowadays, people talking about bearded dragons and substrate. It's not as in my view of what I see in the circles that I inhabit. It's not as like contentious as what it was like even before I started my channel. So within this last last 5 years, I think we've even just moved on with like substrate and bearded dragons now. But back then, it was still like, ooh, can't talk about that. And I was just like, we're going to hit this with science and make this video. And I think in my first month, I grew like 400 or something subscribers in 1 month. And I haven't actually achieved that again since when I first started and I had like 0 subscribers and just that little bump. So I hit like 1,000 subscribers in like 186 days or something like that. That grew quite fast. And it kind of like, once I was not new and novel anymore, and I think I've become a part of the shelf. And I call it the shelf because I think of like, if you think of reptile channels and if you laid out a shelf and if you had like, I don't know, like pop figures or like the ones that you could easily remember off the top of your head, you'd be like Snake Discovery, Adam Wickens, Barcheck, Nerd, blah, 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 blah. And you just line up the shelf of different things. I think I'm getting close to beyond the shelf. Even if people don't watch me, I think a lot of people might know of my existence because there's a lot of channels that I don't watch, like Brian Costco. Loads of people love him. It's just not for me. I don't dislike him. I don't dislike what he says. I don't even know what he says because I just don't watch him. But I know he exists because he's on the shelf, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I catch his stuff every now and then because sometimes it's fun and stuff. And somebody here in St. Louis, he looked 16, but I guess he was like 22, and he got an anaconda because of Brian Barchuk. And it's like he doesn't even able to keep it in his own place. He has to have somebody else keep it in their facility. And I'm just like, it's something I was talking about with this Royal Rumble or whatever the hell it is, this royal family on freaking Roku crap. It's fine. I mean, it'll bring people into the hobby. But then once they're into the hobby, we actually have to spend more time educating them because they didn't actually educate them properly.
Yeah.
That's the way a lot of it feels.
I think part of my problem is that I very much I split things up. I see the pet keeper of a reptile pet keeper is different from a reptile hobbyist. So like there's so many people that walk into a pet store and buy a bearded dragon and they'll go home and they'll keep a bearded dragon its entire lifetime. They'll never even know that the hobby exists, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's layers of like, yeah, I know someone who's got a corn snake, but if you told them if you asked them who Snake Discovery was, they wouldn't even know. They just know like their source of information is their local shop, and that's their entire world of like what they think like about reptile keeping. It's just like, oh, it's a pet and it's like cool shop, gets weird stuff in. But I don't think there's a hobby. Whereas the hobbyist is like a bit more entrenched. So I think not only do I make videos for hobbyists, but I think I make videos for a niche set of hobbyists that are trying to. They have this hunger for this next level, or this like level of information that they don't get from like what's just floating around in herpetoculture. So I think that's kind of limited me. And I think what are the other channels done, like Barchek and Discovery and not Warwick, Wiccans have done. They've targeted that pet level keeper that's just searching on YouTube for information, and that is the broadest base as well. So that's the most opportunity for growth. And it's something that I've been thinking about recently. Maybe I should make some more videos targeted towards that sort of demographic, just for that health of the channel aspect. But at the same time, I think that a lot of these channels do a good job of getting people up to a certain level, and then when people do develop a hunger, then that's when a different type of channel is there for them. So it's almost like a keeper might get prepped by someone else to go watch another channel later on. It doesn't mean they abandon that channel. It just means like some channels are good for entertainment. Like I will still watch like Snake Discovery now and again, and I do find it quite entertaining. But I don't agree with everything they do.
I didn't love that dragon race that they did at the last build-off.
No,
I didn't like that.
I mean, one of the things that I dislike is I like watching their breeding and stuff, but I don't like the way they antagonize babies just for the camera, because it's like, oh, look at the scared little baby. You know it's scared because you're poking it in the face. Maybe just don't poke it in the face. Yeah,
I can see that. I've talked to her personally. And this is something that I bring up several times, especially like on my psychological stuff. We don't hear enough about the individual animals. We don't, like, I've actually dived into looking at empathy in actual reptile keepers and things like that. And so I do find that you have to have some imagination. It's part of it. It's weird. I mean, when you look at empathy in a human brain, this part right here on your right side of your brain is actually where your modeling's at. This spot right here. So if I yawn and you yawn, there's actually information from your eyes that are traveling and getting here long before it gets here. And it's actually dropping off into that, and you'll yawn. So this stuff up here has to be adapted. Your imagination is actually over here. Your memory retrieval's over here. So I'm thinking, theoretically, if I can say that correctly. Theoretically, that this actually has to make a connection with this, because that's the other part also, is where they show empathy on MRIs is also very close to the imagination. And that makes sense. Like, we can empathize with animals, so why would that not? Because we'll never live a life of an animal. We'll have to use our imagination. So I'm thinking that it has to, and the more you can build that connection, the more likely that individual is to be empathetic. Yeah, and that's also the reason why animals, like bearded dragon, like reptiles, don't actually have empathy like we do, because their brains don't have that connection. Where we're spherical, they're linear. You've seen a brain, right? These the neuron brain stuff, I do seem to get a lot of hits on those, but nobody stays. It's like they don't want to hear from me. So that is something that I think that you would be great at listening into, that you should personally dive more into on those topics and those papers, because I think you would enjoy that. And I think the people would love hearing it from you over me. And I think that would be great. I would love to have those things, and anything you'll hear me in the comments correcting you or throwing out theories or whatever, you know. And so the thing is that we don't hear enough people talk about, like, they're like, oh, well, this I breed this particular snake, and like this morph and this morph and this morph. I have a live action reaction video where the girl from Prehistoric Reptiles was talking about a silky being an upgrade to a normal beardy, and oh my god, yeah, I feel you. I was like, are you fucking serious, bitch? I literally said that. Like, are you fucking serious? Like it's a live deal. Like I was fucking steaming. I'm like, I was talking to on Dale. Oh God, I can't think of his name right now. But we were talking about that and about those. Like she might be better than him in the long run. But then she goes and does things like that make me go, maybe she won't be better than him. Because that Silky was obese. The other one wasn't. But that Silky was obese. I don't love the things. So you always hear people say, oh, like that. And those are the podcasts that people kind of want to dive into. Oh, well, you've bred this and this and this and this. Well, why don't you tell us about the individual animal? Nobody ever talks about, well, my animal like this did this, and this is how it behaves. And when I do this, that's why I actually like Bob from Green Room Pythons. Like he does that. He's the only one other than me that I've ever heard of talk about the delay that reptiles have. The other thing is like most of people don't interview people and ask them about what do you do for your local rescues? Because if you're going to sit there and breed something and kick it out there in the universe and then go, well, I don't care. Like it's up to the people. It's like, no, seriously, dude. You've just kicked it out there and the odds that it's going to wind up into a freaking rescue that's already overtaxed is pretty high. So we're not okay with that. So what are you doing for that? We need to support people that do that. What do you think of any of that?
Well, I think the thing that I'm thinking lately is that Hobby doesn't realize what a breeder actually is. And what I mean by that is that there's the historical view of breeding and like good line breeding and doing things in a way where they're encouraging good traits that not only is like desired but like aesthetically by the breeder, but also what helps the animal's welfare and coping in captivity. So I've got a really old budgerigar book. Talks about like line breeding of budgies, but it also talks about working out constitutional weakness. And what he means by that is he's talking about deleterious recessive alleles without even knowing it. So I don't know how up you are on like inbreeding the actual science behind it at all.
Yes. Yeah.
So like,
you should just assume that I have some understanding.
Grand. Okay. So I think in the hobby, there's so many people that are just reproducing, but not being the actual breeder. Like Fairy Tale Dragons, she literally breeds bearded dragons to have a certain conformation of like head structure, good body proportions. She might hold back like 5% of what she actually produces and stuff, like quality and these decent lines of breeding for health. And then you've got dragoon geckos that is also doing very similar to her leopard geckos as well. But there's also the element of like breeding for behavior. So you could breed docility into animals, and like say king snakes, you could be like the non-musking babies, let's hold them back, or like the non-biting ones and hold them back. There's like empty cloud, a space above us all where no one's really reaching into this, the next step of horticulture, and it's actually like making better pets, but also breeding animals to actually fare better in captivity. And I mean that in sense of like, I keep using king snakes because this is this idea that I want to do in the future and have more space and time. But let's say you had like a T-mace with like the T-junction, and you had a king snake go in, you had like prey preference testing, and you had hatchlings that preferred mammalian prey. And then you switch the prey item over and it goes to the other branch. If that snake then goes over with it, then you know that it's not just because it's learned that one corridor means food. It means that actually it's got a preference there. Then why not hold back and breed for preference for mammalian prey as well? So not only are you breeding for like all these colors that you want, you can do that as well, as long as it's good for the actual welfare and health of the animal, alongside all these other things of like body proportions and behavior, what makes good pets, but also like breeding for like, there's a difference between people that were like, I will either eat a pinky or die. there's a difference between like, oh yeah, it will take it rather than it actually prefers it. Now, I'm not going to say you should have a monoculture diet because I don't encourage that, but isn't it good if the majority of what we have available and is convenient to us is also what the animal prefers, and that leads to a better life in captivity? So that's what I mean. Like, I think that's what I view a breeder as, that has that's like the endurance of like, this is for the long haul and this is what I'm really working towards, versus people that are just shoving things in racks and are milling. Like, they are a reptile mill. It's a mill. And then there's a difference between someone like me who's got one pair of Mexican king snakes and has paired them twice. I'm just reproducing pets, but I'm not a breeder, because what a breeder actually represents to me is something that I am nowhere near ready to start and even get involved in. But most of the people that call themselves a breeder, in my definition of what I feel a breeder should be and is, they aren't breeders, they're millers, or they're just reproducing pets.
I have so many ideas on this. I have Pitch the Bitch, my bearded dragon. Super intelligent for a beardy. The other day, I let her free roam. She ran around and then went to the front door. There's these little windows at the front door at the top, so she's not seeing out. Mm-hmm. But she's been out that door a couple times, and her enclosure looks onto that door. So she sees me walk out that door every day. So she knows there's light out there. So she licked the door. I watched her stand there for a while, and I understand how their brains work, and there's that delay. Nobody talks about the delay. But when you look at the brain scans and you have the forebrain, the optic tantum, and then you actually have to imagine that information has to travel back and forth between those two, whereas ours is spherical. So everything we can connect, like, think of it as those shock balls, where it's like you stick all 5 fingers right there and you're getting all electrical signals right there. All of that is connecting every time you do that. Your myelin is connecting different things together by doing that. And that's what I was talking about, like the empathy. So the more you have an imagination that you use during the same time that you use your empathy, your modeling or something, it should increase your knowledge and understanding of other people. And so that's why a human brain does that. But a reptile, you have those spots, and then it actually has to go down the thalamus and move over to the forebrain and then back. And so the forebrain stores the memory, but this part that holds our empathy, our modeling and things like that, that's our optic. It's not our optic tantum. We don't really have an optic tantum, but I don't really know. Like I said, I'm the guy you say, ask how it works. Don't ask me what it's called. And so that's it. That's kind of our reptile brain. And so that causes a delay. So if they're going fast and they're not threatening for their lives, then they've thought about it. They've actually put that thought together. So when she's at the front door licking it and sitting there, I'm pretty sure my girl's freaking intelligent and she knows that she wants to go outside. So I scoot her aside. I open the door. She freezes there. I scoot her back. The screen's already open. She automatically, like, there's no hesitation at all. As soon as I scoot her back, she automatically heads right for that front door because she's already been thinking about it. And she literally walked out to the little patio, sat down beside me to bask. That's a great story in my mind. That really educates on how their brain functioning works. She has that intelligence, and I do eventually want babies from her in a few years because she's like 3 now. So we breed her to somebody like Confancy, and that's the case because I want babies for myself of her intelligence. So I'm breeding for her intelligence because that is way more intelligence than either of the other beardies I got. I don't know a lot of beardies that are that smart. Confancy's a himbo. He's awesome, and he communicates. You were talking about it on one of your episodes. Or your deal, I mentioned it, that when he wants to get out to go poop, he will head bob me without blackbearding. And I take him out and I take him to the tub. He doesn't have to go to the tub. That's one of those things that I questioned on the beardy vet. He doesn't, like, my guys like to go to the tub. They don't have to go to the tub to poop. They like it. They prefer it. It doesn't mean they have to. So there's no medical problem there. They just like it better. And so I take him out and I take him over to go poop. And then he head bobs me when he's completely done. I take him back, I put him in, and he head bobs me back. I think he's like, thanks. I mean, that's kind of the way I'm taking it. I don't know what else to take it as. Is he's just recognizing that I recognize something. And it is selfish in his mind. Like, it is about him. It's not about me. It's not a communication to, it's just a positive thing for him. It's very fascinating. And when you think about the left and right brain hemisphere, this is where we don't know yet on reptiles and stuff. They do have the right and left hemisphere like we do, but are they the same functionality? And so that's one of those neuroscience guys that I've tried to talk to, that I'm trying to have on. He's got MRIs of animals moving while they're moving. He's got some type of that. So I'm going to go over that on my channel eventually and have him on so we could learn how we might learn this on the animals. But every time I drop my phone on the couch, Calm Fancy goes with his left eye. So if it still holds up, and this is what we're talking about when we're talking about science here, it's like, I can prove to you that you're right, that the hemisphere in your right controls your imagination and your left controls your memory. Try to look straight. And if you think of a memory, your eyes will dart to the right. If you think of a imagination, your eyes will dart to the left. The problem with this is it will give you a headache. It is one of those things that will, but it'll prove that that is the hemisphere. So with Calm Fancy looking with his left eye, every single time he's imagining, probably, is there food down there? I'm about to try to go over viper brains and try to see if I might find this in the way they set themselves up. Because we might look at imagination going back into what we think of as the past as a way for our brains to allow us to ambush predator. So therefore, we just grew it with our spherical brains, connecting it to other things. So that may be what we should see, but then we go into, when I take it and I look at actual videos of these things, most of this stuff staged. There's the problem. What's your thoughts?
When you say the state, are you talking about the videos? I've seen the videos of rattlesnakes that are like, they're in like a position, but then they're like pressed down grass. Is that the thing you're saying, stage, or are we talking about different things here?
I'm talking about almost so many of like the professional videos, at least the really like that. It's like that animal has been staged there. Even if the guy just picked it up and moved it from over there to here, that animal is still staged just for the video itself. So you don't really get to see that natural thing. Just like when we're talking about enclosures, you're almost better off to not be there and have a camera and watch them that way.
I get you. Yeah. Yeah, so we naturally will change their behavior because no one, it's like with people. If you watch someone without them knowing you're there, their behavior is like pure because they don't know you're there. As soon as you know someone's watching you, you behave differently.
Particles do the same thing. Yeah, that's the whole thing behind, is it a wave or a particle for light, for photons? Once you measure it, it's a wave or something, and it's like, but yet it's a particle. So this is just science in itself, is that you have to recognize. And that's one of those last papers that you talked on, was the things that we affect by how we breed, which is really interesting and stuff. I mean, let's go into what you're doing with your channel now with your Patreon and the idea of having people try to answer the results of the paper before getting the results of the paper. What, like, I love it. What I see is that you're about to put more investment in your audience and have them put more investment into you. And then on top of that, increase their actual critical thinking skills. I love it. Can you talk more on that?
Yeah, so what I mean, I love reading papers. So in the past I made some videos of like read along study, like reading an entire paper, and it was like 15 minutes long. I didn't do that well, but there are a core set of people that really enjoyed it. So I've always wanted to go back to it, but I was like, in terms of time investment, like it didn't perform very well. So I wanted to make a part of Patreon as doing that, but like in the moment with people. So the reason I wanted to remove the abstract and the discussion element of papers, because obviously that gives the author's interpretations. So there's a difference between the results of a paper versus what a researcher thinks the implementations of it are and what we should do about it. So, for example, you might find in a methodology that snakes, when given the choice, want to stretch fully out, or at least just want to stretch out like near enough. So that's the result. The author's interpretation might be, well, therefore no one's doing it, so we should ban reptiles. Whereas another interpretation could be, well, therefore we just need to improve. So what I wanted to do is to set this up so that it's the pure methodology results, stat analysis, an introduction as to why they're doing the study. We then take away the author's interpretations, so that when we go through it together and we read through and work it all out, people can be like, well, I think that result means this and this and this. And people are a little shy at first and they won't want to say things, but as people go through week by week, we grow more confident in their abilities. And what I really wanted to do is that I didn't want them to read it first, read what the author had to say in discussion about what they think the results mean, and then just come to it and being like, and parrot, even if it's subconscious because they've already absorbed it. Well, I wanted it to be this pure interpretation of results. And then after the fact, we go through and I unveil the abstract and discussion, and we go through the author's interpretations. Then we have a sort of discussion about, do we think that that's necessarily accurate or logical, or would you have said that, or would you think they're way off base? And it's obviously just building those critical thinking skills. And so I've only done one paper so far, and the next paper is already out with like the bits blanked that needs to be blanked, and then people are assuming reading it right now. But the first meetup we had, the first ever like meeting of Journal Club, people really enjoyed it, and I just enjoyed doing it. So there's so many things where I describe like 5% or p-value of 0.05 being like significant, and then like 0.01 being like highly significant. And I was also like in a paper, when I say this result means they significantly did more of this, it's not because they're just saying significant as like a descriptor. They're actually saying like statistically significant, and I was explaining the elements of like what that means within research and stuff. And like some people were like, that makes so much sense. And like I just enjoy like the teaching element of it, I suppose.
Yes, I honestly, when I bring up these brain scans, I never read the papers and stuff under them. I already have an understanding of where things are supposed to be, and you know, it's like, okay, so then I look at other things that I can. I don't just look at one if I can. I look at multiple to make sure how they're lining up. Is this different? It's very fascinating, and I love just going through and going, okay, so if this is different, what does this tell you? Because there is a difference in the way the bearded dragon brain, it actually comes out like the forebrain's more tilted, and it actually goes down almost tilted to where it kind of goes that way. The ball python is just basically this. And then the medulla goes like actually kinks. But the boa, the rainbow boa goes. all the way through the Mandela, like their Mandela is more closer to a bearded dragon than a ball python, and I'm very curious about what that means. Like, I'm not like going, oh God, like I don't like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. That's just neat. It's like, no, what does that mean? How does that mean something? What is it? What's the cause of that? I mean, I don't know if you know anything about it. I've actually wondered if it actually changes their sensation, how they feel. Can a boa open a cage like a lot of snakes can if they figure out how to do it? Because my beardy pitch is very smart for a beardy, and she opened her cage yesterday and escaped. Yeah, that's always scary, ain't it? And then, but then she's not smart enough to do it again. But yet, if I have her in a tote, she's one of 2 reptiles that I have that will actually try to push the lid off. Her, and I have a blind Peter banded skink named Gecko, the Gecko, because when I first got him, I didn't know he was blind, and he was on my arm, and you know what a Peter banded skink is, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. He tried to jump off and attach to the door like a gecko. Like, he just literally tried to jump, and it's like, I don't understand what he's doing. He's trying to move like a gecko. He's a Peter banded skink. That's not going to work for him. But so he got the name Gecko, and I watched him try to push off the lid that I had for him, the container, when I first got him. He tried to push that lid off. Those are the only 2 reptiles that I've ever owned that were smart enough to know to lift. Even though they couldn't do it, they still tried. It's very fascinating to see them as individualized. And so I think it's really cool. Any thoughts on that? And then I would love to hear about what's your best videos? Like, what does the audience seem to respond to the most, that you get the most retention?
So before we go into the videos, I've actually seen royal pythons do it so much. We talk about like actually try to like lift or like get out. Now, I worked in a shop for a very long time. I worked in shops for a long time, but when I was in the last shop, I saw it so often, and there'll be a lip of a gap about that much before the top of the metal, and then the tub they're in the rack, and they would look at this line, and they would be like trying to, they would have this S-curved like neck, like a typical, and they would push, and then their neck would just straighten out and then you see it shaking and straining with the force they're putting behind that like push on that nose as their entire like front half straightens out, and you can see the force of them, they're arching up as they're putting force into it, and they know that that's a gap sort of thing. And I've seen that as well in tubs, where I've seen them do that at like a corner of a tub where they saw me put my thumb and lift the tub up. So I think there's a lot of species that just obviously, you think that, I mean, obviously they have, naturally animals will have like genes that will say that they have a propensity towards like this flavor of this or this and that, but the behavior is adaptive because that's how it doesn't matter how they obtain it. It just like matters that they obtain the resource that they have the genetic propensity towards. So behavior has to be adaptive in that manner. But if you took them out of this environment and moved them somewhere else, they'll still be able to express behavior to obtain goals that they're motivated to obtain, because behavior is about experiences and learning and adaptation. It's not as locked in as what people think it is. So of course, if they experience something, they see something, they're gonna like learn from it and try and like do that. I mean, like, there's the paper on bearded dragons where they put them in a maze of this like door, like this like steel bar, like prison style door, and they put a screen behind it and showed them a video of another bearded dragon opening the door correctly, and the ones that watched the video opened the doors quicker than those that didn't get to watch a video. So they're far more capable of just learning than what people think they are. I think it's just a case of it's an old fashioned way of thinking of like these are just like these primitive brains. It comes back to the triune brain concept of like the inner reptilian brain being dumb and whatnot, and then obviously that translates to people thinking reptiles are dumb. But that has been literally just proven and abandoned by science like decades ago. But yet this lingers on.
And one of the criticisms I've kind of gotten recently is on my last video that I did about, I have a theory that the forebrain is actually, the size of the forebrain has potential to correlate with territory. The size of a reptile's territory for the individual. Now, I think this is more about functionality than it is size, but that's a very interesting deal. It makes sense to me, and but as a scientist, I want to go through the steps. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to disprove this, falsifiable. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I looked into sea turtles because I found that the leatherback. Honestly, with all my theories and stuff that I've come up with, Pixar may not have been that wrong about the leatherback. Pixar may have actually been closer than they think compared to reptiles. Not compared to people, but compared to reptiles, the leatherback may actually have the potential to have more emotional intelligence, the potential for it, compared to other reptiles. Based on the theory that I've got. But they talked about, they were getting on to me because I said that it's pretty absolute that DNA holds memory. Now, the question here should not be, does it add memory? It's why doesn't the cheetah know how to hunt? But why does the sea turtle know to get into the water and go that way? When we understand, when we actually looked at the brain of the leatherback, if you look at all the other sea turtles that mainly live in the shallows, their brain looks exactly the same as every other reptile. Like, it's exactly the same. You can just go boom, 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 boom. The leatherback looks like a lump of mud with like this dingly hanging over the top because of that connection between the forebrain and the freaking, like we have, like there's more of this gray matter most likely between their optic tantrum and their forebrain because they don't have the sight to map like their counterparts do, because they're out there in the open ocean in the darkness, so their eyes haven't developed the way the other sea turtles' eyes have, so their brains are actually smaller and using more of that basic, this is up and this is down, most likely, because that takes less brain power. So they don't need the same size brain as the other ones to map even further because their territories are much bigger than all the others. So that's very fascinating to me. And they ride those currents. So that's in their DNA. That's a memory in a way, but that's not memory like I spent time with my mother last night and we had a fun time. That's memory like, okay, I know where up is, I know where down is, I know that this is the route that I'm supposed to take. Somewhere over here is where I feel like I'm supposed to be. That's probably more what it is, and I'm theorizing here. This isn't an absolute that this is the deal, but this is memory. And I got to thinking about it today, and I talk about the spherical, and these wrinkles are things that we grow. Why does the reptile brain not wrinkle its forebrain? Maybe those lag of that allow, because the bearded dragon has a language that is written into its DNA. Like, that's written in there. So if that's written in there and they don't wrinkle, maybe that's why it's able to be written in there, is because it doesn't wrinkle. Maybe that's the caveat here. I don't know. It's a UVA in the enclosure because I preach about it. I have grow light in almost all my enclosures, and every one of my animals will use it separately to the UVB. They will bask under it separately. They will seek it out, but they never seek it out before finding it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where I go back to the Mandela. I know I'm screwing up that probably.
I get what you mean.
Yeah, so that goes into the optic tantum, gets analysis, and then that has to actually travel down into the forebrain and attached. There should never be like 100% on everything. If you're not open and less judgmental, that's what I didn't like. When Dylan was on Trap Talk, and those guys, some of them were in the audience going, he's just pushing his opinion, and these guys are attacking us for the rack systems. It's like, nobody's attacked you yet on this podcast nobody's even mentioned the rack system thing yet. Plus his opinion is based on some of the most knowledgeable people in the industry and the community, period. So his opinion is not just, I have an opinion. It's, I've listened to the best in the world. My opinion has valid. And so that upset me that somebody would just come out so quickly. And it's like, no, calm down. You're not going to get anywhere being this damn judgmental. And most rescues know this. And you're like, that you can't just go out there and attack that person over there that brings the animal in. So what's your thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, you have to be open to new information and be able to adapt and change your opinion in the light of new evidence. Is the way I'd put that. Just to go back to your question earlier that I forgot to answer. I think I answered your first question. You got excited and we abandoned the second question.
Yeah, I did that on purpose accidentally.
Yeah. In terms of what videos do better, honestly, the ones that are kind of like a video essay, have you thought about it this way, with a slight hint of like controversy, tend to do better. Some of the ones that pique the curiosity and make that curiosity loop of like, you see that thumbnail and you're like, oh, go on there and I'll watch it, even though you're like, am I being baited or not? But I think with me, I think I've built a reputation and a
following.
I mean, people know that when they get into it, it's going to have some level of depth to the video. I hope that people expect that. So when there's something that's slightly like piques the curiosity, it's like, but it's from Reptiles and Research. So hopefully there's a bit of depth to this. Because I've done some things that's like, I want to make a video on a topic, but it's a very boring topic. So I've packaged it in a really creative way to get someone to click on it. And then actually it's like, education. So it's about playing the game as well, unfortunately.
That's what I'm trying to do. My sea turtle episode, the falsifying my theory episode, I actually used clips. So therefore we could try to get the audience to engage more. And so, I mean, I know I've been told I need to let people talk more, and I would love to, but most people I have on, I don't really think that they have the knowledge that I do, and they're basically going to say the same thing that you hear on every other podcast. I mean, it's like, I know I'm different, and people want to hear this. They just don't seem to want to hear it from me. Like, I've talked about things where it's like the reason why some people join that have childhood trauma that actually go into rescues and therapy, they're becoming therapists themselves, is because they grow up with this anger because of abusive people, that they have to control their anger because they can't attack their father or mother that beats them. They can't attack them. So because they have to control that anger, they actually have to use their imagination and empathize more with that person, even though they shouldn't. And then that increases their empathy to a point, increasing their imagination as well. And then as they go along, if they can meet somebody that actually introduces them to a better reality than what they've had in the past, then they might actually put that self-esteem into rescuing and things like that. Nobody stays long enough to hear that.
But that hooked me. You had me hooked there. I was like, that's very, very fascinating.
And I'm trying to make shorts and stuff, and yeah, there's so much of this. I want to hear every thought that you've had on everything that I've just said, because I want to hear from the audience. What do you think I might do better with this? Because I think these topics are things people want to hear. They just don't seem to want to hear them from me.
In terms of when they actually engage and comment, or like the amount of views you get?
Period.
I would have to like delve into your channel a bit more to give you like an actual like really helpful answer. But I think also just time as well. I mean, the position that I'm in now is not the position I had like before. And honestly, this channel has gone through some real slumps. Like I have been through some times where I just really don't want to make videos because like life happened. And the channel kind of just like slumped with this massive like trough, and it's as many times you think that I'll just give up, pack it in, I'm not going to get there, am I? And now I'm in a position where I've got over that hump. Now it's just how far can I take it? But I feel like I've got to the point where I'm never going to stop now, because in terms of financially, in my mind I've made it to a point where I can stick it out now.
Awesome.
I think it's just endurance. And have you ever seen that meme of like that guy digging, and there's like diamonds behind this like wall, and the wall's like this thin, and he turns back, and the other guy's like behind him still digging? I have to find it and show you, but that's just look at that video. Just look at that image sometimes, and it helps a fair bit. But
yeah, I mean, like, you were probably how boring have I been in this conversation?
Not really, no.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's something that a lot of people. It's just something with me. I'm not as linear as most people would want. Like if I'm going to come up with an answer, I may come up with like 50. That whole thing, I had been thinking about the reptile brain and how they might actually increase their empathy by increasing the thalamus between the forebrain. And I literally made a video on that. And then all of a sudden I see I'm literally in the middle of the first time that I made because I broke my arm and I had to have surgery, so I've been out of work for a little bit. I just went back to work yesterday, and so that's why it's like, okay, so this was the day I was hoping to go back, but I went a little sooner because I really need the money. And so I just made a video every single day to keep my sanity. So those neuroscience videos are literally just me. That is completely no deal like that. Like there was no really that much prepping. I looked at the scans, I put some thought into it, and then I freaking filmed it. But freaking during that's when I came up with that, oh crap. Like, you really can't see the bubbles in the brain of the leatherback. So therefore, they must have more of the myelin or the thalamus between the forebrain and the optic tentum. So therefore, they might have more of the potential, like I was talking about, to have the empathy, to be more emotional. And it would be very cool. Like, it's like so many times I want to try to have people on. I've already written to at least one sea turtle rescue to try to have them on to talk about this. And this and more, like, what researchers are they doing? Because it's so cool. What are some of the most wildest research stuff that you've come across?
Wildest?
Just that thing that you were like, oh my God, really?
There's not a lot of them that like really, really shocked me, but a lot of them, the depth of like what I can draw out of it, I was like, I really like this paper because of what I can do with it. So for example, there's a paper on eastern black king snakes, where they've done radio telemetry and they've like followed them around, and they've measured out their territory ranges, but also so what they do is they use certain like den sites within their little territories, and they go through in like basically like a routine of like operating within different preferred den sites within their territory, and then they go through looking like the preferred centimeter depth of like leaf litter for these snakes versus the proximity to a log versus the proximity to like shade from a tree or a bush, and there's just so much to like take from it that can be used for testing what they value. And I've now got like, but also looking at like farm animal research as well for animal welfare and like taking the implications from that into herpetoculture. Actually, the perfect example of the latest paper that made me go, was a paper talking about natural behavior, and actually made a whole video about the paper. Basically, the short end of the stick is basically natural behavior is only a way of generating a hypothesis for what the animal actually values, in the sense that just because something's natural doesn't mean that's actually what the animal values. Lots of behavior like defending against a predator is a natural behavior, but the animal doesn't value that. The animal never wants to experience that, essentially. So just because lots of things that the animals in captivity value, their natural lineage of like what would be natural behavior in the wild just means it's more likely, and the probability of that follow through being what they would value in captivity, in the sense of like, let's say you saw they found them in leaf litter in the wild. I could say, okay, so my hypothesis is that because they find them utilizing this resource in the wild, they will value that in captivity. Because just because something's natural doesn't completely make the link to welfare, and what that means is that they actually value doing that. And the way you can really measure whether something value something is to measure how much they're willing to work for it. So in many studies in like farm animal research is that they trained like it was like pigs, cattle, and sheep would all press a button to gain access to like heat, and some things would do things that were really aversive to them to gain something they really find rewarding. So they would run over an electric grid or go through an area of like jet air like shot at them, to access something they deem valuable, or they'll push turnstiles, or they will do something to access rotary brushes. Have you seen the cows with like the rotary brushes and like it's on their rump and they're like things like that? So you can design an experiment to measure how much they're willing to work for something, and if you measure that against something you know that obviously they highly value, like food. If something is willing to do the exact same thing, they work through the same thing to gain that as well as food, then you know at least in that moment that animal values that resource as much as they value food. So in some studies they would like make them force, like in rats and mice, they would make them climb for a tiny hole, in the sense of like literally it's a struggle, and it's literally like breathe in, like proper struggle to get through, because there's something they value on the other side. So there's multiple different ways of like testing to see what they value. And in terms of welfare, bring that to herpetoculture, there's like so many different papers as well. They showed this example of like in sheep, cattle, or hens would peck a lever to gain access to straw for roosting. But in the 80s, they trained king snakes to turn a pigeon key for access to water. They trained Burmese pythons in 2018 to press an illuminated button for access to food. Like there's so many reptile and snake related things of like operant conditioning that has been done for decades. Yet the hobby's like animals are dumb. It just shows that how the culture of reading into science is only just coming out in herpetoculture now. Because if it was before, the people that were saying they were doing it for 30 years would know about the studies that came out 30 years ago. But because they don't, and they're still talking about antiquated ideas of things that have already been disproven 30 years ago, just shows they're not engaging with science, and they haven't done it for 30 years. So there's this whole thing like that. But even like
just going back to
test. Go ahead.
Going back to what I was talking about earlier, I've got a lot of really intelligent friends, and they're asking me, how do you find brain scans of these animals? And I just freaking Googled it. It's like, no, they're not researching the stuff and they're not engaging as much because there is this, I guess it is a human thing to kind of just go, no. But this is something I do talk about on some of the stuff is where it's like, okay, we have to bring people, we have to look outside of the hobby itself to make sure that, like, especially like, well, I would say everywhere now, right now, everybody's struggling with money. And so many people are in survival mode that to really train them to do conservation, they have to get out of survival mode. If they're so worried about, I can't pay my bill tomorrow. My whole electric's going to go out. My family's going to starve if I don't go work for this massive corporation that is destroying our world. Then they will never have this. No, I need to go out there and do this because this is how we actually save ourselves and the planet. And it's very fascinating how that actually plays out because it's not just, oh, well, once you get them out of starvation mode, they're just going to automatically go to that. No, you have to educate them after they get out of that. You have to make it to where their self-esteem is rising when they actually protect the environment. These are actual goals that should have to be. And this is why, like, I had Modern Reptiles on, and a lot of his buddies are against US Ark and US Ark Florida. And yet I've had Daniel Parker on, and I've talked to Phil Gross and stuff like that. And I support US Ark to a point, but I don't ever look at them normally as conservation. But that's why I actually like US Ark Florida over US Ark, because I've met Daniel. I've talked to Daniel. Daniel does care about conservation. I still talk to him today and send him, things on other states that are happening with their conservation and their FWCs and stuff. It's very important and stuff that we don't talk about. What's your thoughts?
In terms of like conservation in the wild, I think people have to be in a place of comfort to then care about anything other than themselves. If you're like I say, if you're struggling as the last thing on your plate, you have to be at a stage of like, I've got all my ducks in a row, and then I can, like, my heart can bleed for something else. But if you're someone who can't afford that luxury, it's like people say, like, ethics is a luxury, because if you're broke, yeah.
And this goes back to breeders. Like, it's like, no, seriously, if you get on board with this idea and actually start working on this idea, people will have more money to buy from you. Like, there's a circular here to actually doing this. This is not just, oh, well, if you do this, you'll lose everything. No, you won't. You'll actually increase. You have the potential, not necessarily you will, you have the potential to increase your audience for your particular reptiles that you breed, and you can make more money because people have more money to spend. And then we can work from there. I mean, I hear Dylan and a lot of those guys, well, people that keep are more likely to be more everybody that keeps is more controversial or conservational friendly. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. The people you're spending time with are. And that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, but the overall, no. Like you said it, that person with the beardy may not even have ever heard of your channel because that's not where their mind is at. They just got it from the pet store. I literally was in PetSmart the other day. I went in to go pee, and some guy was buying a bearded dragon, and I talked to him for a while, and that was when I was still living in the apartment, so that was long before I broke my arm or anything. So we're talking like back in like June. And we're still talking today, and I've gotten him to get a grow light and a freaking UVB, even though he's going to put his son's going to put the dragon in a 40-gallon. At least I got him to do something else. Got him to do more than he would have otherwise, and I helped him save money doing it to where he can give him that UVA, because it is a benefit. It's not necessarily life-threatening without it, but it does benefit them. And Emerald Skink I separate him. He would run back and forth. All my dragons, they climb, get to the UVB, they slowly work their way down after basking on the bricks after they eat, and they go down and they find that connection between the UVA and the UVB, and then all of a sudden they'll go into the where I have a garden, a tote, and then they'll bask under the UVA by itself. And then they'll eventually go to the front where there's no UV at all. Well, like super light UV if they get any at all. And that's how they work. These animals actually want that. This is actually a thing. And what I like about it, like I do that, and I make them climb to get to their spot for exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure they get some in. I have no obese animals. None. But my savannas, boy, I have 2 savanna monitors because I bought them because they were needing a better home than what they would have gone to. That was it. I had one of the local rescues talk me into buying it from somebody else because they knew I would be able to take care of them. But boy, they go from this to this after they eat. It's like,
yeah.
It's like, are you pregnant? You're not pregnant, right? Oh shit, no, you just ate. That's it. Okay. It's like, I don't want babies, okay?
I think a lot of stuff of like, should snakes or any animal have this and that? It's like, yeah, but you're asking the wrong question. It shouldn't be, do they need it? It should be, do they value it? If you're beyond just keeping them alive, it's like, what do they actually value to make their lives a life worth living, rather than just getting by.
And it's so much of it's so simplistic too. I now have windows for my reptiles in the reptile room. I wish they were bigger, but my Cuban nightingale, he's happy. He will like move himself around to get that sun out of that window, and then move himself around where he can see in it. Even my flying geckos do that. It's like they want to actually engage and look out the windows and stuff. It's very fascinating how all that works. I don't want to take up every bit of your time. I'm sure there's a lot that I would love to talk more about. And I don't know how long you want to stay on, because I'll stay on as long as you want. But what are your thoughts? What are some questions you might have for me? Did you take away from this? That I'm insane? It's okay.
No, I think you're definitely in the right ballpark of like the way that horticulture should be, and I think you're probably going to feel quite plagued by feeling the fact that you think in a way, whether you're in some thoughts, in some lines of reasoning ahead or completely wrong, but you're going to feel kind of plagued by being ahead of everyone else and just you get so frustrated and waiting for everyone else to catch up. It's a real challenge.
Yeah. Oh my God. That is the absolutely perfect way of putting it. And I have actually used those words exactly. No, where they're going, no, you need to slow down. You need to figure this. It's like, no, motherfucker, you need to pick it up. Why are you so damn far behind? This isn't rocket science. I've had astrophysics. I've seen equations that are longer than this room. This is not hard. None of this is like hard. Like, this is some of the easiest shit. I make fun of biologists. Freaking, I'm like, dude, I'm a real scientist. I don't name shit for a living. Like a biologist.
Oh.
It's not hard. I love that you laughed. I like that. I work at Bear Crop Science, so I have a lot of biologists there. And like to give them a lot of crap. It's like, no.
I bet that's fun.
And it's like, no, that, like I said, ask me how things work. Don't ask me what they're called. I don't know. I don't care. I'm supposed to be learning disabled, so I'm pretty happy with where I'm at in life. The fact
Fair
that
enough,
I can do
man.
anything.
Fair enough.
No, but that's literally, people catch up. I'm supposed to be learning disabled. What the fuck's wrong with you people?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are anything else? Like, do you want to talk about the reptile brain more? Do you want to get off here? I mean, that's up to you.
I mean, I think you know more about the reptile brain than me. I mean, I've like learned into it enough to make a presentation on a specific question that I wanted to get people to actually get people thinking. But I think you've gone down the rabbit hole on actual reptile brains far more than me. So,
and I didn't read that many papers. What I did was I understood the human brain through TED Talks and listening to audiobooks on the human brain. And then I was able to transfer a lot of that over, understanding that their brain's smaller, so they wouldn't have the same exact as us. Like, do they have imaginations? Yeah, they wouldn't imagine that the stars are other reptiles, but they would have enough imagination to imagine that that bug might be around that corner. Yeah. And I remember that there's something around that corner.
It's amazing, isn't it, that I always say, and I keep saying it lately, is that I think people, when they first get into keeping reptiles, they have more common sense than people who have been in it for a long time, because they haven't had so much dogma forced into their heads. In the sense of, like, you see people, they see you putting things in racks, and I worked in a shop where normal people would come in just to look around, but, oh, this is a weird shop. And they would see people like putting snakes in racks and shit, but you can't put them in there, surely. And that's the natural reaction, because that's the common sense reaction. But then, obviously, the person in the hobby is like, no, because they like tight spaces, and then they get all this dogma put in their heads. But, like, their instinctive reaction to that is the correct one. And then, like, the hobby forces people into these dogmatic lanes of thought. Just like, no, you have to think about this, and you have to think about this, and you have to think like this. And it's like, no, I don't. No, I don't. Like, there's a lack of original thought sometimes, in the sense of, like, well, I said in I think it's the after questions of that talk, where these people are talking about, like, the size of tub, and why is it now, like, stressing in this bigger tub? It's not because it's like, oh, this is a bigger tub. It's because it had lost that thigmotaxis of being hugged by the walls. And do you know what fixes that? A hide. Like, that simple level of, like thought of, like, on a granular basis. But because they, like, had this dogma in their heads of being like, oh, it means small tub, big tub. Like, they can't think critically about what's happening in the tub, like, in that scenario. And I was just like, but it's, and then I think I commented and said, just give it a hide. And then she replied and said, the tub is the hide. So I was just like, well, that conversation's over. But there's a lot of things where people get, like, into these ruts of, like, this is how you're supposed to think. And it's like, a lot of the times it's completely illogical as well. And there's always a lot of the myths and stuff, and the way people act around reptiles is, like, faith driven rather than, like, this, like, critical thinking and logical, like, this culture of the rack that's happening. None of this is bloody logical. Like, even when racks were invented, they didn't say, like, oh yeah, we did this because ball pythons like burrows, we did this to replicate a burrow. They said, you can house so many snakes in this. It's efficient, time saving. Like, none of it was about the purpose of the things that have come out now to try and justify it. It was like, we're doing it because we want a lot of snakes in a lot of space. but now there's like this cult of the rack that's been like, oh no, but like, a lot of logical thinking is.
Yeah, I have studied nonverbal human communication, and so it does transfer over to reptiles and animals and people and all that stuff. Just like Laura Trina has talked about she's talked about it. But the kicker is, yes, I am a fantastic poker player. I can actually read people so well at a poker table, I can card count. Like I literally, like, it's not complex. It's actually quite simple. And so when you actually go and you play poker for a while, because when I was younger, I was really big into it. And so it's like, oh, well, the people who win a lot are the people that know nothing, literally just walking off the street. They don't know jack shit, or the people that know a shit ton. Everybody in between is in the same exact boat. There's really so little difference in the way they think that it's just ridiculous. And that's why it's so easy to read them. It's literally, if there's no chips in the pot, what they tell you, if they're excited about their hand, they're excited about their hand. If they're not excited about their hand, then they look uninterested. It's as simple as that. But once they have chips in the pot, if they look interested in their hand, it's because they're not. They're trying to scare you. If they don't look interested in their hand, they're trying to keep you. It's so freaking simple. It's not even funny how just simplistic it is. And the way we need to, like, I did this in that actual study that I did, where I had people come in and play a role-playing game that was designed by a Russian in 1989 to test mass hysteria. If you've ever heard of Mafia or the Hidden Werewolf or Hidden Hitler, that role-playing game was actually created by a Russian psychologist for his doctoral thesis in 1989, and then it switched over to a role-playing game. It's the exact opposite that happened to the IQ test. The IQ test was originally kind of a game that was turned into an educational thing, where this one was an educational thing that turned into a game. So I used it and I taught people this. It's like, okay, so if you want to hide your tails, if you got to think differently. And what you should do is you should always think about the question. If you're always questioning, then your body language will always read the same no matter what you're thinking, because it's always a question. It's as simple as that. Like, don't try to hide your shit. Just think about it differently than you normally would. Whereas you would look down and go, okay, I have ace king. I have a really great hand. Oh my God. It's like, no, you watch everybody else and you go, what does everybody else have? Okay, I have ace king. How does that compare to what I know about everybody else? Okay, that just changes everything in the world. And this is what we should be leaning in on reptiles, is this. So we do have that mass thinking. So we do need to figure out a way to change that. But you almost get that mass thinking in everything. So it's how do we change that? And that's what I kind of the thinking of, we never hear people talk about how do they support their local rescues. No. And it may go back to people don't want to think about that negativity of the hobby. When I went into surgery, right before I did, I called, because my local rescue and me are very close friends. I've even had them on the podcast. And they actually, like I told her, I said, I need you to break into my house. If you don't hear from me, because, I mean, it's minor surgery. But what if something happens to me? What happens to my animals? I don't want them to sit here and starve to death, waiting on somebody to come find my body. You know what I mean? It's like, so I'm going to do this to where it's easy for you to break into my house and just come collect my animals. And this is every one of my animals. This is their personalities. This is individual needs that they might have. This is where they're located. And she wrote me back and went, I'm crying. I've never, like, this is just not something we get to experience, somebody that actually cares about their animals this deeply. And this is just one of those things, like, we need people to talk about their individual animals more. Why this isn't common things. So why don't you tell us a story about one of your animals and something that they did that you thought was really cool?
Something they did that I thought
that's
really,
individual.
A really good example. And so much they do individually that you just get normalized to because it's your animal. Then you're like, what can I say that's worthwhile to entertain somebody else? And you're like, oh, and like, so I know all the individual, obviously, personalities. This guy's neurotic. Like, so I used to work in a shop, and then I left, and then someone else took over as the manager. And there was this guy, like, you can't pick him up because he would just bite for food. Like, he would just latch on, no questions asked. Like, I can change his water bowl, put the water bowl back in, and he'll be like sniffing at the water bowl and like trying to chew on it because I've touched it. Like, he's not as normal as other king snakes. He's like, if there's like a slight, he's like min-maxed towards this sort of crazy food-driven self. So he was obviously like that and come flying forward for food. And this place was scared of him. And they would like try to slam the door shut, so he kept getting like crushing the door and dropped on the floor, and they just couldn't handle this king snake. So I took him on. He's got this kink in his back, and I took him on, and he is still like that. But I can just hook him and redirect him where he needs to go and things like that. But for the most part, he's easy to manage. You just have to know that he's going to come flying forward. So rather than open the door in front of me and try and access something that's in front of him, I have to like open the door from the other side and come in from the side that he's not on, and then do things where there's visual barriers. And like, you just learn instinctively, like to use visual barriers to your advantage, so he doesn't see you come to pick up the water bowl and things like that. But that's again, they were like treating this king snake as any other king snake, and they didn't learn how to manage the snake because of how he is. They just struggled with it. So I took him on just to look after him. But
I've heard people talk about like the dual brains of reptiles. Like, they have something that makes their bodies work separately, the snake, right? Like, I don't know what I'm talking about here, because I literally have never seen this scan or whatever the hell they're talking about. To me, it's the way the brain works. You know, you have your sense of smell, and people don't realize that, you know, and I think people know this knowledge, they just never put any thought into it, is that what you smell actually has the most influence on actual your memories. Well, if you actually look at a reptile brain, their oral stalk, that basically I think of it like almost a mass spectrometer, where the actual particle comes in and it drops per weight, and that's how they tell what it is. That's kind of what their smell is thing. And so that actually leads straight to the because a lot of the stuff that gets transferred from what their senses are is in the optic tantrum, and that gets shipped over your forebrain. But that smell, the stalk, goes straight into the forebrain, does not go to the optic tantrum first. And it goes straight into the forebrain, and that would explain that. That would explain why smell is so much more intrinsic to memory, because we're not that far off, as you know, millions of years from what a snake's brain is. So then I believe that actually that straight line allows them for more automatic movement. Like that to me makes a lot more sense. Like you wouldn't want to have to go evaluate this and then send it to your memory to kind of go, what is this? If you need to be this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's still going to travel from there down, and it's going to go to your probably separate into the optic tantrum and kick down, but it's also going to come back to go back into your memory.
Yeah, he's very much like bite first, ask questions second.
Yeah, and that's why. But I've heard of like nervous systems or other brains in the reptiles that control their bodies, to where like their feet may actually work. They just like if their spine's broke, their feet will actually work.
Douglas Mader, I think, was the one that said that on the Animals at Home podcast with that spine that was severed and it regenerated, wasn't it?
Yeah, but also like literally the legs worked on their own. Like I've heard that somewhere else and stuff. I just don't know what they're talking about when they're like, well, there's like a dual brain and there's a brain to control the body down here as well. Or I don't fully understand that yet.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I wasn't for sure if you would or not. I'm open to understanding it.
No, you've definitely gone further into the actual looking at the brain structures than I have, for sure.
I have a lot of free time when I work.
Yeah.
Like I push a lot of buttons in the lab, so I listen to your podcast and Dylan's and a lot of other ones. And so that's when anybody that's out there that's watching this that has a podcast, this is when I'm like listening. And like so when I'm literally probably on a computer typing something in, or I've literally just poured something into something else. Like it's, yeah, no. So
yeah, I think well, if you like the podcast, you're gonna like the episode I filmed with Reptiles, which went like a 3-hour rant. It just derailed.
Awesome. I've been trying to get her on. I just started talking to her because I would love to have somebody who has more knowledge on the behaviorals of these animals.
Lloyd Serini would be a good one.
She's tough to have on. She's tough to get on. And it may have been just the fact that she doesn't know who the hell I am until I did that Dylan. Because people struggle to get through my stuff. And it's okay.
I think what you'll find is when you first start, not many people give you the time of day because I'm not saying this about Laurie before I say this after we just talked about Laurie, but a lot of the case, a lot of people aren't willing to do something unless there's something in it for them.
Yes.
So like they won't go on a podcast unless it has like a certain amount of followers because I think they'll gain something from that following if that following like views them. Whereas I'm like, I'll just talk about reptiles. I saw you doing all this like neuroscience stuff, and I like you were going further than me, so I knew we were going to have a good conversation. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. But I didn't care about what I don't even know how many followers do you have. I haven't even looked.
I think it's like 157.
Oh, there you go. I didn't even look. I was just like, yeah, let's do it. Whereas I think if it was like, yeah, I've got a leopard gecko, and I've just got into reptiles, I'd be like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have this Zoom call because there's only so much I could talk about, I suppose. But I mean, I think as you grow, more opportunities come naturally. I mean, some like having Beardy Vet on was literally one of the highlights of the channel. And do you know what's the best part of that? He says no to a lot of stuff, and he actually asked me to come on, and I was like, "What?" Yeah. We were sat down at a bar at a conference we're both at, and he was like, "Yeah, I should come on." I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah."
I actually know somebody that works with him in some way out of Ohio that I've talked to from Facebook.
All right.
And so I've known about them for a while, and I've used their data in some of my earlier videos. I showed the sexing of my bearded dragons. I've got 3. And I've got one that at 4 months old couldn't lift itself up off the ground. A teenage girl had it in a 10-gallon tank for like 2 months. And so I rehabbed it. Perfectly healthy now, except for it has no fat pads, and I can't get it to grow fat pads. She gets depressed, but I thought it was a male. It's a normal, but I thought it was a male because it has the longer nose to vent ratio. It has a little bit bigger spikes. It has the bigger spikes on the tail, but it never had the hemipenes. But I've seen other people talk about theirs and how their bearded dragon changed sex. Like literally, it sounded like they had a vet tell them that these bearded dragons change sex. And I'm like, my issue with that is every single time I've heard that, I've asked them if it has a lip issue. Because that lip issue can also be a calcium deficiency when it's younger. And only one of them has told me that it was not, they didn't have a lip issue. And that was one with a missing foot from when it was a baby. And so I'm wondering if the trauma in early adolescence messes with the actual bone structure and stuff, that it actually creates and makes it harder to sex.
I think I'm not aware of them actually being able to change sex once they're born. I know there's the super females in the wild, but that's because of like the genetics of that population.
What's a super female? I've heard the term before.
Super females, a female bearded dragon with the characteristics of a male. So I think they have the chromosomes of a male, but they're actually a female. And they act like with the aggression and the size of like a male bearded dragon, but that is determined like in the egg and like temperature as well. If they have like really, I think it's like if it's really hot temperatures, you can have like this change in the chromosomes in the egg. But I don't believe there's anything where like they change once they're actually already a bearded dragon, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why I came to that conclusion, because of the lip issue. And I never saw that dragon's face that had the leg missing. So I cannot collaborate that they changed that it doesn't.
Because, so you just think they just couldn't sex it and then they realized it was something after the fact that they...
Well, it's not just that. It's that like I just said about Hydra, my girl. She, a few months back... She, I think it was like February, laid like 30 eggs in her enclosure. Like, I mean, it wasn't that many, but it was a lot. It's like, yeah, no, this is a girl. But the whole time I'm like, I don't understand why it doesn't have the hemipenes, but it has the longer snout to vent ratio than Pitch does. Pitch is like 19 inches long, but yet Fancy is actually longer than she is nose to vent.
Right, yeah. So that the snout to vent like length sort of thing.
Yeah,
I tend to only go by like hemipenal bulges when you shine the torch through. But yeah.
But the weird thing is that Hydra always had a butt crack. That's not a joke either. Like, she literally had a butt crack, like a normal person would. I actually have it in the video. Like, I show it. It's like, no, there's a butt crack here. And I'm wondering if that's the hemipenes that have been malformed due to trauma.
Maybe.
But it's a girl because it laid the eggs. But
I'm not sure on that one.
I'm not sure either. It's one of those things, and that's where I got to introduce to that guy, was talking about this stuff and asking about this, and that's where I found the Beardy Vet guy. And I don't know if I've ever had a conversation with this person or not, but like you said, my channel, something I've talked about with somebody before, nobody's coming on my show that's a psychopath or is like that. I don't have enough followers. People don't. you come on my show because you want to learn. That's why Bill Stewart likes having conversations with me, because I'll get into depth on psychological stuff like that. I will murder the hell out of it. I actually have a couple videos I want to do. There's a guy that, off that trap talk that Dylan had with him, there was a guy that I want him on. I do want you on if you're listening to this. And he said that he, because I got beardies when I was in a very toxic job at a startup pharmaceutical company, and they really helped me through it. And this guy was because I think the audience would enjoy this, where he was a crime scene cleanup person, and the stresses of that job and how his snakes helped him through it. Like that, I would love to hear that story. I just got back last Saturday. The Saturday before that. It was before my surgery. I went to a clean the lake, like clean the river deal for work. Mm-hmm. And so it's like I helped out where I could. I couldn't get out there. But this older lady who had beardies, who's had Savannah monitors and stuff like that, she was talking about her husband who died of Alzheimer's and how the reptiles actually helped her with that. Because every day that guy would be able to get up and actually go down and basically be reintroduced to these animals. And it was a positive thing for him. And so it was very positive for the relationship. But Alzheimer's is something that's really close to home, because that's what my grandmother had. And that is like the one topic that's so, I'm so limited on what I'm willing to talk about it, because it's so deep and personal for me that I will cry. I will bust down. And stories like that is things that I would love to hear. And I do worry about it pushing to get a reptile if there's something wrong with you, or to do this and when you're not in a position, like just negative sides to it. But that comes with it. Like, it's like, I don't know, but I still would love to hear these stories.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever heard anything like that? Have you ever heard have these things been a positive when you were in a toxic situation? You actually talked a few times about your past relationship and your new relationship. And this is something I haven't gotten yet with Bill Stewart yet, because his wife does arrow. I apologize for cutting you off real quick. There was just something I kind of wanted to bring up at this moment. Something I've talked about for years. You can break everybody down to what makes them feel self-important. So that's the only question you can ask of everybody, that you will get an answer that is dramatically different, that will actually open you up to understanding that person as an individual. And so what you do there is you can increase their self-importance. That's how good relationships is about that. And you'll find that women that have healthy self-esteem want that. A buddy of mine in a relationship, he helped her do her oil change on a car. That was such a positive thing for her, because nobody's ever taught her that. So for her to achieve that with his help was a positive in that relationship. So somebody like Bill Stewart and his wife, and how she's now doing this arrow thing for rescues, I can't imagine just the positivity in that relationship. Snake discovery, the positivity between those two, and everything they do just would increase their self-esteem. Like, I think about you and what you've talked about before, and how you've talked about this relationship being the best that you've had. Like, would you like to talk on that?
Yeah. I mean, it helps being with someone that is also into reptiles, and that you can have these long conversations, and you can. Do you think that you two keeping together the way you guys have, and how
does that work? Does that increase the positivity in the relationship, individualized but together, kind of way?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. How do you, like, an example, if you don't mind?
I mean, like, we travel quite a lot to see people that we're friends with on the other side of the country. I mean, just being able to just use a 5-hour car journey, just being able to just have a conversation with someone who can have a conversation with you at the depth and level of the conversation you want to have it about reptiles for 5 hours straight. And it's not a conversation that you've got a partner that's not interested and you're talking their ear off and they can't stand it, but it's someone that's like just as hyped about the conversation as you, and you just kind of like feed off of each other in that sort of way, and you both like build off of it. Whereas like you can have another relationship where someone looks down upon the things that you're interested in, so that it makes it, Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think the way that I would say that is that you and her are both educated in this field, and the fact that you both are purposely doing this, and it's something I talked about on the Modern Reptile Deals. I had a bully in college. That guy's a miserable piece of shit, and everybody will tell you how much smarter he is than me. No, he's not. There's nothing I can't learn from that guy that I can't learn out of a book. You can learn billions of shit from me that you can't learn in any book. You'll never find the shit that I know in books, in some of the books. But that's the thing. You guys, my self-importance is tied into learning. And it sounds similar for you guys. Like your self-importance is tied into this. So therefore, having that relationship to where both of you can talk about the same thing that you are both tied in positively to, just increases that positivity, just goes, and it builds. I mean, it's one of those things. I think, what's your thoughts? I think that's the best way to say it.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's, and that's really a very important lesson to learn. I had, there was one girl at work, lady, I mean, I'm 5'7", maybe. She must have been, 5'10", 5'11", but very attractive. Asked her how she was doing one day, and I read body language. I could tell that she was all of a sudden into me. And I'm like, okay, I can do that because she seems attracted to me because I'm a nice guy and I actually give a shit. I can keep that up. That's something that I can keep up in a relationship. Caring, I can do that. I'm not an asshole. I'm not a piece of shit that's selfish. No matter how I sound sometimes. And so it's like, and so I told her one day, like, I have reptiles, I make it clear, like, a guy the other day, like a biologist I just talked to when I got back from work, from the deal, he goes, I saw this article and I thought of you. I'm like, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry you had to go through that. He goes, no, this. And it says, it's an NPR article about talking to strangers can bring joy, even if that stranger is a lizard. That's literally the title of the thing. And I go, I don't know how you read that and don't think of me. Because this conversation, I'll have this with somebody, like, literally on the street. Like, literally. Like, this exact conversation. I want the guard shack at work. Give me just a second. The guard shack at work knows me as the lizard. They made a toy of me. They have a toy of me. The lizard.
Oh, I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, they made a toy of me. And they literally do call me the lizard because I'm more than happy to talk about it. And that lady lost so much interest in me right then. And it's like, okay, no, I'm fine with that. It keeps me from putting more effort into this. But I went back and I talked to her one day about an idea that I have. I lost one of my first beardies that I had after like a couple months. I have really just screwed this up right now. Give me just a second. I moved too much. And yeah, I've got a really cool idea. I used to walk my beardies at the local lake when I lived in the apartment because I couldn't just take them out in the yard and let them get sun. I have leashes. I outfitted a stroller for them. And this guy walks up to me and goes, "Oh, hey, did you bring them today?" And I think I brought my Savannahs out. I have a backpack that's made for like small dogs, and I put locks on it so they can't get out and nobody can get bit by them, but they can still get sun, like actual real sun. Mm-hmm. And so he goes, "Oh, yeah." I'm like, "Wow, have I ever met you before?" He goes, No, we've never met, but I've watched you." Oh, okay. He was once, he just got out of surgery and stuff the last time I talked to him. But he is he was the president of the Air Patrol for Shriners Children's Hospital. And right. So I would love to eventually do like a reptile show, like an actual show, not an expo, where we bring in actual reptile educators, like enough to fill 15 to 30 minute slot for an hour to 2 hours, so 4 to 10 people. And so then you have booths that you can walk to, and so these guys can get breaks every now and then, and they can actually like have people go in, they can actually educate people for 15 to 30 minutes and then move on to the next booth and the next booth, and do it for like a children's hospital. And then like see if we could bring in like the St. Louis Blues or the Kansas City Chiefs player. How many people would pay thousands of dollars to have a footballer walk through them with a reptile show? Like to actually experience a reptile show with a footballer. Like you're in Europe, that's why I say it that way. Like it's like, yeah, you're probably like, it would still like get the.
It would be quite weird, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. But how many people would pay thousands of dollars to have that experience? And so we make more money for the actual the children's hospital. But I made this death mold of my beardy. Like you can, it's actually from a dead bearded dragon. There's actually clay underneath it right now. But yeah. And so he had this hump on his back. He got it over the last 30 days of his life. I never got it checked out by the vet because I thought because he was in really good shape. Like I said, I don't let my dragons get obese, and I do take him outside. So he was not metabolic bone disease. This was genetic. So this may have been cancerous or something. And this may have got him. Either that or a firefly got into my house because I found them that exact weekend in the house. And their top had chicken wire over it and not like a regular screen because I had built their enclosure. And I didn't know that fireflies were getting into my house. So no, but this right here, imagine kids being able to paint this. How much would they enjoy that? Or I can make rubber versions. And so we have kids paint this. And then they get a rubber version when they give this to us, and then we put these up for auction. So let the kids paint them, put them up for auction, have the story of the kid with the deal, so people can bid on them and stuff. And that money would go to the children's hospital. I love that idea. My brother's actually learning disabled. Just because the school labeled me as learning disabled, I'm actually learning very fast to the point, and I'm not the only person this happens to, that you learn so fast that everything's boring, and so the basics are really like boring and you don't ever learn them properly because you're just so bored. And yet, so that's why you get labeled with a learning disability if they make you. Like it's one of those things. And so I told that to that lady because she liked me when I was open and nice to her. But she didn't seem to respond. This didn't excite her in any way, shape, or form. I'm sorry. I have more and more time for you. If this type of thing doesn't excite you at all, what the fuck are you doing talking to me? Like, seriously. An awesome reptile show that would make money for a children's hospital. Allow those kids to have a really fun day and get a new toy out of it that actually educates them on reptiles. Which one of us doesn't like that? What's your thoughts? Anything?
I think if you think it's worthwhile doing something, then go for it. I mean, no one ever did anything because they were half interested, were they?
Well, we've been going on 2 hours. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Any thoughts? Any takeaways from this?
I think we pretty much covered a lot.
Well, I really do appreciate you. Did you feel like I was doing anything that? But yeah, any. What are some of the biggest takeaways from this? So I might put this in the front of the video.
Probably like what people are breeding for, in like the ethics we want to continue in herpetoculture, rather than just like reproducing animals, actually thinking about what breeding actually means.
Yeah, and I think because there is some positive stuff to breeding. I mean, weirdly enough, I had a couple breeders on that just went for so long, and they were so excited, like they took over the conversation. And I loved it and I hate it. I'm still friends with both. I still talk to both of them. One of them gave me a ride back and forth from surgery. And I was comparing monitor breeders to skink breeders because there is overlap in the behavior of the two species. So it's like, why one over the other? Why is that? But after the interview, I had screwed up the second half and like it didn't get recorded. And I watched Peyton Manning and some American footballers like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning talking with Eli Manning, and the level of positivity that they had towards each other, exactly the same level of excitement and positivity and everything that these breeders had. Like, it was exactly the same. Just like, oh yeah, no, like this. How do you think of that? Like, oh my god, like I mean, it was so
Passion,
awesome.
yeah.
It was, and it's like, dude, what's the correlation between the two? What does football, American football, probably sports in general, have to relate to actual breeding? And I talked to Bill Stewart. Do you have an answer?
No. Carry on.
But it's interesting, right? And it's like, okay, there's rules to both, but the outcome, even as consistently as you could be, the outcome can change. There's that saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Both of them have that entangled into it. You could be the best player in the world and still lose. You could tie. You might win in a weird fashion that you didn't think you were. You could breed and never get the actual snake that you wanted, but get a completely rare one that you've never seen before in your whole life. And I think that's the deal. It's that I can consistently do this with the bit of rules, but get different results. And I think that increases that level of positivity, because it goes back to self-importance as well. This really interesting deal happens in self-importance. It's like, oh, well, I did this. We did this. We created life. I've got baby Emerald Swifts, and they're fantastic. Just this one I was able to catch And I got a picture of it, and people go, "Where is it?" And I'm like, "Right there, right in front of you." It's like, it looks like a rock. I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably a reason why they don't want to get eaten." Most animals don't eat rocks in the wild like that, I guess. Well, I want to say I appreciate you. I do respect you, and I want to give you a hand for everything that you've done for the community and
Thank you.
all these things, man. Keep it up. If you can get into some neuroscience, man, if you ever want me on to just freaking go, okay, so this is this. I had planned on getting a 3D printer and making my own brains for reptiles.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
And doing models like this that are actually clear, see-through, like this, and actually putting a brain in it.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. And you know that, and I'm the guy to do it, weirdly enough. But yeah. So yeah, anything else before we shut this down?
No, just thanks for having me. I appreciate having me on.
Awesome.